Welcome back to the Marketplace, your home of NBL free agency. The end of the financial year is done. We are now into July, which means in just a few days' time, Summer League takes full hold and we start to look at the teams filling out the rest of their rosters. But a couple have been very, very busy since we last got together. I'm Jack Hevron. Alongside me, the two men who know everything that's going on in free agency, Olgun and Pete, the best newsbreaker in Australian basketball, and Pete Hooley from Hool's Hearing. We've got a couple of teams that are starting to be pretty much closed for business now, don't we?
We do, and we're starting to see that before. Normally we go into Summer League, there's a lot of teams shopping. It doesn't seem like that's going to be the case this year. There'll be certainly a few who need to fill some big spots, but everyone's been very proactive, which is funny because we sit here, we go back to the live show we had where we had a bunch of signings first day, then nothing for about 6-7 weeks, and then now it's all starting to really ramp up because NBL 26 is around the corner.
Olgun, is that the difference a little bit coming into this year's Summer League, is that rather than having a volume of signings that are going to come, they're more specific signings this time around?
Yeah, and I think the key thing is you look at the third two-way that NBA teams have. You look at teams in Japan and Europe who are trying to strike deals early. And so NBL teams are trying to match that and say, all right, we need to get these guys locked in, because if we don't, then we're going to lose them and then we're going to be left with our bottom priorities, and we don't want to do that.
We've got a very, very late addition to the show that we'll get to a little bit later on as well. But let's start with what we know, and let's start with Melbourne United. They've been on the record of saying that they wanted an import centre and they wanted an import point guard. They've got their import point guard.
Yeah, Tyson Walker, he's this 6'1", speedy point guard. Played in the G League last season with the Legends. He had some injuries, and so I think United was able to get him somewhat on the cheap because he is a younger point guard and because he is coming off an injury. So they got him for cheaper than if he would have come off a better season playing longer, or if he would have come off this season with Melbourne United. And so they did a good job of locking him in. What I was told about the process is that they went through a really diligent intel process with him, speaking to people around him, speaking to his coaches. This is the first time that Dean Vickerman's gone for multiple imports in quite some time, and so they wanted to make sure that they nailed it. And so that was the key for Tyson Walker, to make sure they got a high-character guy. Yeah,
it's going to be an exciting one. You think about, we heard the mutual respect or everything with the going on with Ian Clark there. We understood that it didn't look likely Ian Clark would return, but they didn't close the door. Walker comes in lightning quick. He's listed as 6'1". I think that's a little generous. He's a little shorter than that.
But good news for Damon Lowry.
But he's going to be fun to watch play, and I think he's going to complement the style of the new Melbourne United we're going to see. A couple of their stars are getting a little bit older. They're not slowing down, but they are getting a little bit older. They bring in Milton Doyle, who's a different type of playmaker as well. So now they've brought in Walker, who can really try and shake things up. He'll be a pest defensively as well, but get out and push in transition. I think it's a good complementary piece for them to add.
The interesting discussion point that we had before we started the show today is around the starting point guard position now. As we take a look at the Melbourne United depth chart, we've got Shea Ili as the starter for now. Do we think that's the way it's going to play out?
If Shea Ili's healthy, he's going to be starting. What he does, what he means to winning, you can't put a scoring value on that. You can't put a price tag on that. Everybody wants a Shea Ili on their team. Now, I know he had a couple of knocks in the NBL, which ruled him out of that season to focus on getting ready for an NBL season. Shea Ili is so important to everything that Melbourne United do. And every time they seem to have success, it's on the back of what he does on the court. We know the knock he had in the Grand Final series as well that slowed things down a little bit. So as long as he's all good to go, he'll be starting. And in the end, everything's interchangeable with all of this. We've seen Dean Vickerman not be afraid to throw different lineups throughout the season. Walker might start some games for sure, depending what happens in who they're playing against. But I fully expect, as long as everything goes the way it should, Shea Ili will be their starting point guard.
Yeah, what's the common theme with a lot of Dean Vickerman teams, but especially this one? Multiple ball carriers across the board. You have Shirley, you have Tyson Walker, you have Tom Wilson, Dash Daniels, Milton Doyle, Chris Golding. A lot of these guys can create their own shots, and I think the reason why I think Ili probably has to start is because you don't have Delhi anymore. Now you have Tyson Walker, who's a different sort of player. You get more self-shot creation there, but there's no dog on the ball. Delhi was a version of that. Dean Vickerman liked to start Delhi and Shirley together. It's good to have two ball carriers, but without the sort of the dogged defense of Delhi now, Ili is really the only guy outside of glimpses we've seen from Dash Daniels of the NBL 1 and through the under-19s. He's really the only guy who you know is going to be an awesome point of attack guy.
The obvious spot now is the starting centre. As I said, they have been on the record, Melbourne, and said that they wanted an import in this position. If they can land the appropriate player here with the depth that they've got, my goodness me, this looks like a good team.
It's a massive piece though, isn't it? You look around how hard it is, obviously, to get marquee big men locally, but the import centre, how important that could be. If they've never played in the NBL, you can take a gamble at times with the type of player they are, the type of person they are. You know the culture of Melbourne United are trying to build and continue to sustain. You talk about everything they went through with Walker and interviewing him. So looking at all of that in a short period of time with Summer League can be tough, but already they're having a look at some big names as well. But you're right, you put it against what they've got there, and I keep going on record, I think Finn Delaney, we're going to see the best version of him. Under Dean Vickerman, he's going to be much more aggressive. The lineup suits him, the way they play. Golding's not slowing down anytime soon. Doyle, I'm super excited about in Melbourne United colours as well. They nailed that last piece, and you know how defensively they're going to be under Vickerman. They're going to be around the mark.
And let's talk about the roster build. You know, Tyson Walker, like I said, coming off a season where he was hampered by some injuries, he wasn't too expensive. And so they did save some cash for that centre spot. The centre market across the board, not just marquees, but imports, is really, really tough because Japan exists and they're stealing a lot of the high-level centres. And so it is really important to have some level of cash locked in to be able to get a high-quality guy at that spot, and it seems like United has done that.
Will they have a specific type of centre in mind for that position? Would it be a scoring type centre like a Joe Luala-Chul, or is it more a rebound screener in a Derek Pardon's type role, or are they open to all options?
No, I think it's going to be that dynamic, impactful guy on the scoreboard where you can roll the ball in. Because you look back to the Championship Series, it really hurt them not having that.
Yep.
Now, Rob Lowe could step out and shoot the three. Marcus Lee was perfect for what they needed. That's what they're looking at right now, right? Someone you can throw in, demand the respect, to make the defense have to turn a little bit and say, okay, we've got to help out maybe one of our big men who's guarding that, and then it frees up the Goldings, the Doyles, the Walkers for some easy shots on the outside. They didn't have that last year, and it ended up being an Achilles heel. So I think they'll be going for that dynamic scoring, that interior presence. And you're right, we didn't see that at all last year from MU.
The other 9 teams and their sets of fans are going to hate what we're about to say. They're going to be very good again, Melbourne, aren't they? They're just looking at the construct of this roster and the depth and all the options that you spoke about, Olgun. They're going to be a very hard team to beat once more.
And you know, it's a Dean Vickerman coach team, so you can give them a bunch of wins just because of that. You know the defense that he's going to bring to the table. It's a team that still has Shea Ili as the head of the snake, and it has Finn Delaney added to it now. So they once again bring in that dynamic, local, sort of do-it-all four-man. If they can nail that 5 spot, then not only is that starting group really high level, which includes obviously adding Milton Doyle and bringing back Chris Golding, who until he does start to decline, we're not going to say he is going to decline, but this bench is also really, really impressive because you have a lot of guys here who have really high floors. You look at Krislovic, Bowen, Krebs, Tommy Wilson, Tyson Walker. These are guys who you know are going to give a certain amount of effort and a certain amount of production in a game. You know, you can rely on these guys to step in and provide meaningful minutes and meaningful moments. Not every team has that, and so locking in that depth is so important.
I'll double down on that by saying they are the ultimate trust core to come off the bench because that's what Dean Vickerman needs. For whatever reason, whether it's injuries, we talked about Shea Ili with the question mark always, making sure that he's okay, whether it's foul trouble, whatever it is, you've got guys who can play 30 minutes a game and start. Bowen proved that last year. Krislovic, I think, is a really, really good signing for them that I don't want to say people have forgotten about, but it happens so early. It gives them the outside shooting. He's really, really sound defensively in that aspect as well. But then you look at if something did happen with Shea Ili, well, Walker can step into the starting point guard role. Dash Daniels will get some more minutes under his belt. He'll grow as the season goes. Doyle can play the backup point guard as well as being the starting shooting guard, and everything can flow from there. So they've constructed it really well to have insurance if they need it, and if they don't need it, as you said, they're going to be contending.
Well, when we put this show together and we knew we were catching up early this week, we had the Sydney Kings in there anyway, just as a bit of a stock take, because we haven't spoken about the Kings for quite a few weeks because after Kendrick Davis, most of their business was done. Here is the team as it stands right now. As you'll see, the addition late on Friday, before we closed off the books for Marketplace for the weekend, is Tim Suarez returning to the team as the starting centre. Now, I don't think many of us had a lot of visibility on this coming in, but this is a definite recruit based on needs, and I don't mind it.
No, 100%. And we knew that they were looking for an impactful 5-man that they can bring in. And I think all of our minds shifted toward, all right, who is going to be the best guy to play alongside Matthew Dellavedova or Kendrick Davis? But this is a really good option for someone who can play really well alongside Xavier Cooks. And so if you want to be able to extract the most out of Cooks back to that MVP form, then Tim Suarez is the guy because of his ability to stretch the floor, because he is a big who has good hands. He, I think, was really underrated defensively last time he was here as well. His wall-ups were elite. He's a legit 6'11". He has a dense body, and so I think he ticks every single box this team needs. I know everyone was hoping that Sydney would bring in some sort of lob threat, right? But he is someone who can be effective rolling to the basket, but he can do so many other things, and most importantly, he's a high-character guy. He's someone who can plug and play, and on this team that has a bunch of stars, Kendrick Davis, Delhi, Xavier Cooks, Bull Kowal, we're hoping takes a step up. Having that complementary guy is so important.
And I think it's really good to understand that talking to Chris Pongrass, talking to Brian Goorjian is, yeah, he might be their starting centre, but that can change. Obviously, they really are high on what Kelly Leopepe can do and certain matchups around the league. So maybe it's one game it'll be Kelly starting, one game it's Suarez. But the shooting aspect for it, when you've got a guy like Kendrick Davis who thrives in space, just throwing a centre who can stretch the floor alongside, if he came off the bench, say, with Kouat Noi, all of a sudden you've got to take 2 extra steps to both of those guys. And imagine the work and the space that KD and Delhi can play with there. That's a really, really strong lineup to have. So I'm sure Bogut, Goorjian, they're trying to figure it all out. The preseason game is going to be fun to watch because a bunch of different combinations there, but they've nailed it for everything that they need. They get a little bit more size as well that Kelly Leopepe doesn't have, but he's got the strength to beat out anybody else anyway. But it's a perfect signing for them.
Yeah, 2 things. Firstly, Tim Suarez is 28. We forget that when he came to the NBL last time, he was 25. That's a baby in terms of player development. And so this is someone who's gone to Japan. He's put up reasonable numbers there, and so he comes in as someone who's theoretically entering his prime now. You should get a better player than they had last time, so that's important. The other one is when you look at the roster, you look at that depth chart, just like last season, it's positional versatility. So like you said, it doesn't always have to be Tim Suarez starting at the 5. He could go to the bench. It could be Xavier Cook starting at the 5. They could throw a bunch of smaller ball lineups. If you look at that point guard position, Delhi we have pegged in as that starting point guard. When he goes to the bench, it's Kendrick Davis as that starting point guard. So they will always have an elite floor general, an elite point guard on the floor at all times. And then all the other guys, you can just mix and match through there. They've got a lot of plug and play wings and off guards. So the positional versatility makes this team super dangerous going into the season.
I know that everyone reacts, Pete, at the time of a signing, and I don't live on social media, I don't live on the comments, but I was interested to see some of the comments, and some Sydney Kings fans really high on this Tim Suarez signing. Others, as Olgun said, maybe thinking that it was going to be a bigger player, a bigger name. I feel like this is the sort of signing where we'll get to halfway through the season and go, they got this one right.
I mean, you go back to what they were looking for. They couldn't afford to have that massive name in this position. We've spoke about this, and they've played the salary cap perfectly in terms of they're using the marquee rules. They're doing all of that to their advantage, which is what it's there for. We keep harping on about it. People like to bring up the salary cap. The rules are there for everybody to use the right way. The Sydney Kings, Chris Pongrass, are exceptional at doing that. But they were hamstrung on what they could spend in that. They couldn't go out and get that massive, dynamic, impactful centre. We spoke about Marcus Lee having some interest in both. They couldn't afford Marcus Lee in that spot. So to get Tim Suarez, whatever it costs, it's the perfect piece to round out at everything they could probably go and get.
And you don't always want that flashy centre. With the roster
They've got enough there, don't they?
With the roster they have, you have Delhi, Kendrick Davis, Xavier Cooks. There's a lot of talent there. There's a potential Jalen Galloway leap that we're going to see as well.
Yes.
So all the talent is there, and so to maybe you might throw like oil into water at that point, and it might mess things up. Whereas if you get someone like Tim Suarez, who they know is a high character guy, is going to come in and play his role to perfection, and was a starting center on their championship team before, he ticks all the boxes and some. And again, function over flash is the key to winning in the NBL, and that's what the Kings have done.
I like that. To the Tasmania JackJumpers, they are just about closed for business now. In fact, I think they are closed for business, Peter Hooley, because they have added Bryce Hamilton into their lineup. Another really, really good signing based on what we've seen and what we've heard.
Yeah, if you can see the smile on my face, I'm super high on this Tasmania team. I think that it's been built perfectly. He's a dynamic scorer. He can score on his own as well as helping getting others involved. They've got playmaking on the wing. Obviously, they lose Jordan Crawford. They lose Milton Doyle. Yes, they are big losses. But the way they're trying to build now, we always knew they were going to go after these playmaking guys, these high scoring guys. They're wiry, the way they can get down the lane. I'm really excited for what they're going to bring. And then all their complementary pieces around when we look at their depth chart. I couldn't be higher on what Tassie currently looks like.
So is he their guy? We are seeing some of his highlights, and he looks like a bucket. We said that in the WhatsApp group on Friday. Is he now their new Milton Doyle? Is this how we have to look at Bryce Hamilton?
He'll be one of them because they needed that every single year, right? We've had the question marks last year like, hey, Milton Doyle's got to do a little bit more here. They need it. The way they've always played, they like to slow things down under Scott Roth. They grind it out defensively. They're always going to be physical and one of the best defensive teams in the league. But you go back to when they were winning it all, and even when the first year when they managed to make it all the way to a championship series, you need to have a game breaker. You need to have someone who can take it on, break off the offense and kind of do it their own way. So he'll definitely be one of those guys where Scott Roth will say, hey, We play within a system here. You've got a little bit of a longer leash because we need you to do that in the NBL.
And the last season, the JackJumpers were a historically bad offensive team.
Yes.
And a lot of that had to do with injuries, but a lot of it just had to do with Milton Doyle and Jordan Crawford not being able to find their spots. And that had to do with injuries too. But between Bryce Hamilton and David Johnson, you get two dynamic scoring guards added into this lineup. And I always say that Sean McDonald is solid, and that really undersells what he is. But he's the definition of reliable as a point guard, as a shot maker, playing off the ball, playing on the ball. And so having that as the guy who can set up these dynamic imports is important. And then when you extend it to Josh Bannon and Will Magnay, you have these guys who, again, I think there's a puzzle here that I think really works. Again, it's similar to Sydney. It's function over flash. It's not just about getting the best imports. It's about seeing what fits. And I think the balance here is good, and especially the shooting off the bench. Everyone here can shoot. Kobe Williamson, we have to see what he looks like in the NBL, but all these guys are knockdown shooters. So I think the offense should take a big leap on top of a defense that we know that Scott Roth can put forward really effectively.
So should we expect, I agree with everything you just said, should we expect a different style of the JackJumpers this year? As you've both said, we're used to them walking the ball up the floor and it being a grind, and you know, you can beat Tasmania, but it might be 74 plays 70
They're
kind
really
of thing.
slow paced. One of the slowest paces in the league.
So is it going to
every
look
season.
different this year?
I think it is a little bit, and again, it's going to come down to health. I say I'm super high on what they can achieve. They've got to stay healthy. They've got question marks about guys who have failed to do that. Josh Bannon's coming off 2 years in Brisbane where he had injuries in each year. Will Magnay we know about. Sean McDonald, I'm willing to give an asterisk to last year. He was a guy who didn't get injured much before that. He had a really unlucky year. But all of that rolling out there, and they've got these athletic pieces to be able to push the pace a bit. Sean McDonald's going to get Johnson and Hamilton the ball in the right spots. They might get out in transition. Josh Bannon, we know, is going to play a certain way. He's going to be gritty. He's going to be physical, clean up the glass like he's been doing for the NBL All-Select team. But Will Magnay, he can take another leap forward there. But the guys coming off the bench is what helps them. They've got a chip on their shoulder. Ben Ayre's going to come in. The Tassie JackJumper fans are going to love every time he checks in.
Well, he's an ant, isn't he, really?
Nick Marshall, Anthony Drimmick, they've got all these kind of pieces here that are going to help them move forward and move the needle forward offensively. Defensively, you can understand what they're going to be able to do. Bannon's going to help that. We'll wait and see what Johnson and Hamilton do in that regard in Tassie. It's a different defensive unit they've probably been part of in anywhere they've played before. But right now, I'm really high on what this team can achieve.
The big question is around Will Magnay. We've seen Josh Bannon now play in the last few days in the NBL Select team. Played a lot of 5, actually. They went quite small, and he looked quite good in that position. So Scott Roth would have been watching that. But it's around this time of year when we get to Summer League and what's happening in the NBA that Will Magnay's name generally comes up. And Olgun, it looks like it's coming up again.
Yeah, so Will Magnay is currently in the US with an NBA team. And so there is an opportunity there for him to potentially get on an NBA roster. And when we talk about that, obviously we know what Will Magnay is. He's an Olympian. A lot of NBA teams liked him around that time of year as well. So he can carve out a role on an NBA roster in some capacity. So that's potential of happening for Magnay. And that's where we look at the roster build here and we see only 2 imports. Now, initially they were more than likely thinking that, all right, Josh Bannon's injury history is a bit touch and go. Will Magnay's injury history is a bit touch and go. It's probably good to have the insurance of only having 2 imports. There's another one there if we absolutely need to use it. Now with Magnay over in the US with an NBA team, looks like there's a chance that he can get on an NBA roster. Having that 3rd import up your sleeve is so important and so valuable, because if he does go, then you can fill that spot with a high-level guy, and it doesn't change the balance of this team. And so the JackJumpers, we all thought, all right, going with 2 imports, are you really going to compete with just 2? Well, they may have to use that 3rd import spot sooner than later.
And I was okay with it being the insurance policy as well.
You've always said this.
Because I think that this is a really, really good lineup and one that's going to be able to contend for a title. But for that regard as well, around this time you're hearing how much NBA teams love Will Magnay, whatever that could transpire to be. We all think he's an NBA talent for sure. He's still incredibly young. We've just known him for so long in the NBL. He's had the stints before. But I can understand exactly what they're thinking there. But what happened last year with Jack McVeigh can't happen again. So you have to now be prepared of, hey, if we lose someone to the NBA local, with no other local is probably going to be available, we want to bring in an impactful guy. You take Will Magnay out of this roster and not be able to replace him with a dynamic guy, I'm having a whole different conversation about this puzzle piece and how it can contend. All of a sudden, you've got a backup plan in case that happens with a high-level import that you can go and find, and he just slots in nicely. It won't be the same, but a nice piece for them to then be able to go and hopefully be a top 14.
It's funny, doing the maths here, just briefly in my head, how are we going to fit 6 teams into the play-off and the play-in lineups all of a sudden? Because this JackJumpers team, I know you're both high on, I know Derek's really high on, and when you look at them as they are right now in a depth chart, it's hard not to be really confident about Tasmania.
I said this last year after the FIBA break about the Illawarra Hawks. When I was looking at teams winning a title, I come up with a bunch of questions. So why can't they win the title? And I couldn't think of that for the Illawarra Hawks. Now, granted, they go on and win the title, so that might have been an anomaly. I normally get a lot of things wrong. But when I'm starting to do this about teams, I look at the questions I have here. Obviously, health is a big one. You can understand that. We'll see what happens with Will Magnay. But outside of that, I really don't have too many questions on what they can achieve once we see it all come together. And things will change in pre-season. Guys will be here and there. But I look at some other teams that perhaps have finished. We talked about Adelaide last week. I've got way more questions about Adelaide's makeup as a roster than I do of Tassie right now.
Really?
Yeah.
This roster is way more balanced than Adelaide's roster. And there are some questions. Look, we don't know what Johnson and Hamilton are going to look like in the NBL just yet. I think we have some trust that they will be high-level guys, but we have to wait and see. And then, Nick Marshall, Anthony Drimmick, Ben Air, what sort of production are they going to get from this bench is a real question, just because we haven't seen Nick Marshall in a consistent extended role. Anthony Drimmick, we have seen that. With Juk Den, we've seen that. But then Kobe Williamson, is there enough big depth as well? So there are some questions, but they seem to be more on the periphery. I think we all agree that the balance of this team is really, really good right now.
So I mentioned off the top of this edition of Marketplace that we do have one late name that we want to throw up. For transparency, we're recording around lunchtime on a Monday here in Melbourne. And we thought the show was going to be done after the Tasmania JackJumpers, and then something hit your inbox, Olgun, and yours as well, Pete. Ironically, speaking about a former JackJumper in Jack McVeigh.
All right, so Jack McVeigh was waived by the Houston Rockets. He's currently in Adelaide, and he lives there, right? So he's working out there. Now, there are NBL teams who have sort of thrown their name in the hat. And you have to, right? He is a high-level talent, championship series MVP. We know that the Adelaide 36ers asked the question before they locked in Zylan Cheatham. It does seem like he's prepared to go back to the NBA and figure it out there.
Sure.
And then there are also high-level Euro teams that are interested in him, and I know that he has interest in seeing what he looks like in that market, going back to that opportunity. But there are NBL teams who are willing to say, like, all right, like, you are a marquee. We're gonna try really hard for you.
And you're looking, again, we like to look at the gaps now, right, and where that would fit, where that could possibly come out. And again, Adelaide 36 is one that I knew. We both knew that they had a phone call, and you have to do that. That's what the patient approach now, and everyone's getting on certain teams, they're not filling their rosters. You've got to be patient as all of these key dates with waves and guys being picked up start to occur to see what happens next. And obviously they went down the Zylan Cheatham route. But after that, it's like, okay, where could he fit then as a marquee? And I believe Tasmania have his rights still.
Tasmania have his rights for one more season.
So what does that mean? Just try and explain that.
If he does decide NBL is where I want to be, then Tassie, if they want to keep him, it's what happened with Dejan Vasiljevic. They would have to either delist someone to be able to put him in, or they have come to a mutual release and then he goes elsewhere. And I look at elsewhere, if that did happen to eventuate. The Brisbane Bullets, you could potentially squeeze him in there with Josh Bannon leaving. Casey Prather would slide down to the 3 a little bit. The Cairns Taipans have a gap. And I know every time we see marquees, everyone right now is like, oh, the Perth Wildcats. It doesn't really fit.
It doesn't fit in Perth.
They've got Christian Doolittle, Dylan Windler. It doesn't fit unless you had Christian Doolittle play the 5.
But you know what? I will say that you look at Perth, a lot of teams, there are teams who are in need of a marquee, and they're reaching out and showing interest to those marquee players, notwithstanding their fit on the roster. I'll say that much, right? I'm not saying that Perth has reached out to Jack McVeigh.
It sounded like
I haven't heard that. But I know that Perth has reached out to a lot of guys who aren't necessarily guys who, all right, we're going to put you here or here. It's more, we need a marquee and we will make you fit.
What about South East Melbourne?
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one. It's one that you
Looks like they're going to lose Matt Hurt. That's the reason I bring it up.
I mean, you talk about, again, South East Melbourne, but the Illawarra Hawks have an open power forward spot right now. Would they have enough sizes when Matt Hurt can play the 5? Right now, they have question marks around that with Lockie Albright being drafted, so probably not. But there are gaps enough there where you do ask the question to be like, okay, what could eventually? I know Josh King's very high on Jack McVeigh. What could it take to bring you across? Again, those conversations then go hand in hand with Tasmania do have his rights. So that's the one thing you have to figure out is what would you force Tasmania's hand there one way or another. But if you're a great team, which a lot of these teams are, you got to pick up the phone and ask the question.
Look, it's easy to draw lots of connections too. Where is Jack McVeigh from? He's a Queensland kid. So Brisbane's there, Kansas there. They theoretically do need to fill those spots. Again, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but you can draw those connections. The Illawarra Hawks, you've got another Queensland kid in Sam Froling there. Do they want to team up? Is that a thing
that felt like a long bow?
Right. No, totally.
They had coffee once.
And you can draw these connections. I will say that the overwhelming likelihood, and I think where Jack McVeigh's head is right now, is that he's going to be back in the NBA in some capacity. And if it's not the NBA, he does have a lot of interest in gauging his market in the European space.
Let's double down on that because we said it with Will McDowell-White too, where we understand. We think that Europe's likely, but this doesn't mean that teams aren't picking up the phone to ask what would it take, how would it look.
And it doesn't mean they're not open to it either.
Correct. They are open to it. Again, the contract's got to be right, the situation's got to be right. And you don't know unless you ask that, which is why we always put it out there.
And that will see us out for this episode of Marketplace. Who knows? Jack McVeigh, Derek put the call out last episode for Will to come home. Maybe we got the school wrong, but maybe it's time for Jack McVeigh to come home and back to the NBL as well. He'd look great back here as well, particularly after the experience and everything that he's gained in the last 12 months.
He also left on such a high as well. So if he can come back and replicate that, I think all NBL fans will be happy.
Is this the last time we see you two in person before you go to Summer League? What does this all look like for you two?
You know what? I would like to come back in here and do like a Summer League preview. I know I don't have the authority to make that call, but I'd love to do something like that. Come in here, preview the Australians going over there. There's a lot that are going to be there. And then, I'm basically just counting the days until I fly out to Summer League. He gets there before me, so just prepare it for me.
That's a man who's paid by the show. But whatever you need,
Someone wants another invoice.
We'll be here. It's going to be very busy. The list of names gets bigger and bigger. It's going to be a fun week.
We are going to take a very good look in coming episodes at Summer League and who's available and the slots that are there. Olgun certainly pitched himself to be a part of that show, so we'll see where it lands.
Can't wait to see you guys again.
Thanks for being with us on the Marketplace. You'll see Pete and I back. You might see Olgun back next time. In the meantime, stay up to date at nbl.com.au and, of course, download the NBL app.